Okay, so today we're going to be building a game of 2048. If you haven't heard of it, this is what the game looks like, okay? And essentially you have to keep swiping in order to complete the score of 2048. And you do it by doubling the numbers each time you swipe. If you would like to take this game to the next level and even integrate a backend so that you can work with a database and save usernames and high scores, I would suggest learning how to use Node.js next. So this JavaScript runtime environment for server-side scripting right here, as well as Convex Dev for the database. To use Convex, simply sign up to them here, click on the Create Project button, name your project and click on Follow a Quick Start Guide for your favorite framework, making sure to click on Node.js. This will take you to the steps and code you need in order to get started with using a database. All other documentation on how to add data to your database, such as a new user, as well as update data such as high scores, can also be found in the documentation. This part is outside the scope of this video, but if you'd like to give it a go, I always strongly encourage developers to challenge themselves. You can find the link to this in the video description below, and don't forget to let me know how you get on. So I'm excited. We're going to be building this game in, you guessed it, pure JavaScript, HTML, and CSS. We're not going to be using any helpers like Canva because we want to be great JavaScript developers at the end of the day. And this is going to have a whole bunch of fun methods and properties and array work that will really help us do that. So let's do it. Okay, so let's go ahead and create a project. I'm just going to create an empty directory. I'm going to call it 2048 for ease. And ta-da, there we go. So I've just created an empty folder essentially, or directory, whatever you want to call it, that lives in a directory called WebStorm Projects on my computer. It is currently empty because we need to put in some files. So what I'm going to do is add an HTML file. So as you can see, WebStorm added the .html extension. Please go ahead and do the same if you're not using WebStorm to let your code editor know to treat this as an HTML file. And I already have all the boilerplate here, so please copy it if your code editor did not add this so that we can continue. Okay? So great. The first thing we're going to do is just go ahead and just rename the title of this to 2048, and that will show up in the tab. Now, we're not really going to have much here. We're going to essentially create a div. So I'm just going to create a div for you, and it's going to have the class name of container, so we can style it up to look like the container of the game. And in here, we're going to have a div as well. I'm going to give this the class name of info, so class info, so we can style it up just as an information div that holds things such as h1 elements that have the title of our game, which is 2048. Great. I'm also going to have a div, and I'm going to give this the class name of score container, just so we can style it up a bit. So here we go. Here's our score container, and I'm going to have a div in here as well. I think let's go ahead and just give this the class name of score title, and then I'm just gonna put the text of score. So there we go. If it's a title, maybe let's go ahead and change this to an h2 element, just because that is semantically more correct. And then as well in here, I want to essentially have the actual score. So what I can do is have maybe just another p element. Maybe let's just use the span element to cut through that and put a 0 here. And I'm going to pick this out and give it the ID of score. Great. So there we go. There's all our info right here. It ends there. Let's have another p element, so just like that. And I'm going to put join the numbers to get the, and then I'm going to put this in bold, 2048 tile. Okay, great. And then I'm literally just going to have a div. I'm going to give this the class of grid so we can style it to look like a grid. And that's really it. That's all we're going to have in our HTML file. So amazing. We are also going to have to style this up. So I am going to link this. I'm going to use the link tag and I'm going to do rel style sheet. And then as the href, we're just going to simply, well, first let's make the file. So I'm going to create a new style sheet. I'm going to call this style CSS. And then I'm simply going to write style CSS here because we put it on the same level as the index HTML file. So we don't need to go into any folders or anything. We just get the file name. And great, we can also put the script tag in here. You can put it at the end of your body, or you can put it in the header and then use the DOM content event listener to listen out to if all of this has loaded before you run the script. So this is just another way to do it. I'm going to do it for this tutorial just to show you something new if you haven't used this way before. Great, and of course we need to make that file, so it's a JavaScript file called app. So app.js, again, you will see the .js extension added, so your code editor knows to treat this as a JavaScript file. Great, let's move on. I think let's style it up first. So for this, I'm just going to minimize that. I'm going to get the whole body of the file. If you actually want to see what this looks like, we can copy the path, copy the absolute path, and then in my browser, I'm just going to paste it. It doesn't look like much yet because we are yet to add the styling, of course. Okay, so first off, I'm just actually going to take the body. I'm just going to minimize this. And the background color, I'm just going to use hex codes for this tutorial just because I feel like it. I'm going to make this kind of off-white. And then I'm going to use display flex. I'm going to initialize flexbox so that I can center everything from left to right. So center just like so. I'm also going to say that the font family is going to be Clear Sans, and Helvetica can be the backup. Okay, and then serif if that fails also. Great. Any H1 element that we're going to have in here is going to have the font size of 80 pixels. So just go ahead and do the same. And then the line height for this, I did add a line height, is going to be 0.7. Okay. The color of this, again, I have picked this out already, is going to be this kind of gray. And I'm just going to get rid of any margin. So just set it to 0. Okay. So just like that. We don't need the px when the 0 is used. Next, I'm finding the element with the class name of container, so dot is for class name, and I'm going to make sure that the width of it is 468 pixels, and the margin top, so I'm spacing it out, I'm giving it 30 pixels of spacing. So at the moment, this will just look like so. Great. Now let's continue. The info container, so the element with the class name of info, I'm going to also use display flex to initialize flexbox, justify content, and then I'm going to do space between. And I'm also going to give it a margin just on the bottom, however, of 20 pixels. So my info container looks like this. Let's just move this down even further. So now I'm going to get the element with the class name of grid, and I'm going to give it a width of 456 pixels. I'm going to give it a height of 460 pixels as well. Let's give it a background color. So this is one I have picked out. I'm going to use hash BBADAO for the background color, and then a border as well. I'm going to make it really thick, so 7 pixels solid, and the color for this is going to be the same as the background color. Great. The border radius of this I'm going to also set as 6 pixels, and then the margin top I'm going to do 20 pixels to space it out. So at the moment the grid is going to look like this. I'm just going to zoom out of this for now. Wonderful. The divs that are going to go inside it, well, we'll style them up when the time comes to it. For now, I'm going to grab the element with the class name of school container, and I'm just going to make sure that the text align is in the center. So there we go. The width of it is going to be 70 pixels. The height of it is going to be 60 pixels. Let's also add a border radius to it. I'm going to go of 3 pixels. I'm going to give it a background color as well. So once again, I'm going to use hex for this. I'm going to go with 8F7A66. Great. And then the color of the text is just going to be white. The element with the ID of score, I'm also just going to change the font size of this to be 30 pixels, okay, being really precise. And then the element with the class name of score title, I'm again just going to change the font size. I'm going to make it be 16 pixels. So at the moment, all of this looks like so. And I think it looks quite good. Great. One thing I do want to do is put score at the top. So let's go back to our HTML. I'm just going to change and get to the, okay, so that looks good. And then for this one, perhaps let's get rid of this span. I'm just going to put it in here and put this maybe as the H2 and this just as a P element. So just like that. To the P element, I'm also actually going to assign this the ID of results so we can essentially override it eventually with whether we've lost or won. Okay, and let's get rid of the margin on the H2 as well. So the H2 margin 0 and also for the P element. Okay, so I think that looks a bit better. Great, let's move on. Okay, so let's move over to our JavaScript file now where all the magic happens. So what I'm going to do, because we use the script tag in the head, we're going to have to listen out until all this content has loaded. Okay, so let's go back here and I'm going to essentially grab the document and use the add event listener to listen out to when all the DOM content has loaded. And then we're going to put a callback function here. So once that has happened, we do this, okay, the content of this. Let's first start off just by picking out the things we need. So I'm going to go into the document and use the query selector. So let's just pick out the element with the class name of grid. So dot means class name, as we know. And I'm going to save this as the grid display. So super simple. Next, I'm going to grab the document and I'm going to get element by ID. And I'm going to look in my document for something with the ID of score. And I'm going to save this as the score display. Okay, you could use get element by ID, or you could use the query selector, but then we need to also look for the ID of score. It really is up to you, whatever you choose. Okay, so there we go. And once again, I'm going to use document and get element by ID. And I'm going to look for an element with the ID of result. And then I'm going to save this as the result display. So just like that. And just like we use query selector, you could have used get elements by class name. That is fine too. So yeah, really up to you. I'm just going to keep it like that. So essentially what I've done, I'm just going to console log this out for you, is looked in my document. I'm going to inspect this page for the element with the class name of grid, and I picked it out. I haven't done anything with it, but I have picked it out in order for us to work with it in JavaScript, and I've done so for all the others too. Okay, great. Now, because we picked it out, what I'm going to do is now actually using JavaScript, add some squares into it. So let's go ahead and do that. Create the playing board is what I'm going to call it. And in fact, sorry, just because we're using query selector, I'm just going to use it for all of them just to make everything a bit more consistent. That was kind of annoying me. Great. Now, in order to create the board, we're going to write a function called create board. So just like so. So there we go. And I'm just going to call it down here. So what do we want to do in this function? Well, I want to loop essentially over, let's use the width for this, const width. I want the width of my grid to be 4 squares, and it's actually going to be 4 by 4, so I can use the width in order to say that I want to create 16 squares. So for this, I'm going to use a loop for let I equals 0. As long as I is smaller than width multiplied by width, let's increment I by 1. Okay? So we're going to use a for loop to do this. And by this, I mean create 16 squares. So let's use document, and I'm going to use create element in order to create 16 divs. I'm going to just save this under the const square for now, just to make it a bit easier to work with. Okay, obviously we're not really doing much with this div at the moment until we actually get the grid display, which we picked out earlier. And I'm going to use a method called append child, and I'm going to just stick that square in there. So now each time this loops, it's going to add a div, it's going to add a div, it's going to do it 16 times. So now if I look in here and we go to elements in the div, with the class of grid, you will see 16 divs, because that's what we did. We added 16 divs. Now we need to style these up, right? Because at the moment you can't even see them. So I'm actually going to do so in the style sheet. I'm going to say, so where's my grid? I'm going to say that any div that lives inside the element with the class name of grid, so that's what I've done. There's a space here. I'm going to say each one of these has a width of 100 pixels and a height of 100 pixels. Let's space them out from each other by 7 pixels, so just like so. I'm going to give each one a background color as well, as I'm going to use a hex code. EEE4DA is the hex code that I'm going to use. Let's also make the color a different color, so the color of the font. AFA192 is what I'm going to use. And then the font weight is also going to be heavier, so I'm going to make it bold. Okay, and I'm also going to do text align center. The font size I'm going to choose to use is 60 pixels. And I'm also going to change the line height. I'm going to change it to be 1.6. Let's also actually give this a border radius. We're going to give each one a border radius to round off a little bit of 3 pixels. So great, so at the moment, if I look in here, all of these look like that. And if I want them to wrap over each other like a snake, well, on the grid itself, I'm going to actually initialize flexbox, so display flex, and I'm going to do flex, wrap, wrap. Okay, so if I just did display flex or initialize flexbox, they would all try to squish here, but I want them to wrap over each other. So that's why I've used flex wrap. So now they're like going like this. They're wrapping over each other. If you look in here again, that's what they are doing. Great. So this is looking good. I've added the squares using JavaScript. Let's move on. So let's go back in here. So before we put each square into the grid, I'm going to grab each one and use inner HTML to just assign it the value of 0. Okay? So that's what I've done. So there we go. That's looking good. And actually, it would be quite good if we can keep account what's happening with these squares. So I'm going to actually save them in an array up there. So once that's done, I'm going to get that array, which is currently empty. I'm going to push each square we create into it. Okay, so each time this loops, the square will be pushed in there. I'm just going to console log out what this looks like. Console log the squares array. So now, if we get our console log, you will see each div being added each time until there's 16 in there. Wonderful. This is great. Okay, so now I'm just going to get rid of that console log and let's continue. It is now time, so make sure to still be in that callback function. I'm going to go ahead and generate a new number, so just like so. And let's write our function generate, just like that. And what I'm going to do this time is generate a new number. It's going to be a random number, however. I'm going to do so randomly on the board. So in order to do that, I need to actually define a random number. It's going to be a random number from 0 to 15 because we need to pass it through into the squares array in order to get back one square with either the next 0 up to 15. So in order to do that, I'm going to use math random and call it. And this will bring back a number from 0 to just under 1. And I'm going to multiply it by the square's length. Okay, so my square's length here should be 16 by now. There should be 16 items in there after this function runs. And by multiplying it by math random, we can get any number from 0 all the way up to 15.999. However, passing through 15.99 into our squares array won't give us back anything. Okay, these need to be full numbers. And for that, I'm going to actually pass it through math floor to round down to the nearest integer. Okay, so now we should get each time a number from 0 to 15, and that should work. So for example, if I get back the number 15, it will give me back the last square in the array, right? Because we count in indexes. So great, we have our random number. And in fact, if, let's get that squares array, right, and pass through that random number, whatever it is, I'm just going to console log it here, console log random number. If random number inner HTML equals 0, don't make it strictly equals just because we don't care if it's a string or a number, just we want it to equal 0. And if that is true, I'm going to get the squares and I'm going to pass through random number, and I'm actually going to change it to be a 2. Okay, so that's all I've done. Now, where do we want to call this? We'll call this twice, so this happens on 2 tiles. However, you know, if the square that we picked doesn't equal 0 already, let's do else, and let's just generate again. Okay, so there we go. So now I'm going to show you, ta-da, each time 2 tiles will be essentially changed to 2, and this is looking good. I love it. Okay, randomly each time. Great. So that is looking good. We will also write a function here to check for game over, but we'll do that when the time comes. Okay, so we're generating a new number. I think it's now time to move the board right or left. So let's start off with function move right. And for this, we're going to use a loop. Okay, so I'm just going to move this down for let I equals 0 once again. And as long as I is smaller than 16, we increment I by 1. So what we're going to do essentially, say as long as I is modulus 4 and leaves the remainder of 0. So essentially, if we get I and use modulus 4 in it, so for example, 4 modulus 4 leaves no remainder, 8 modulus 4 also leaves no remainder, and so on. So essentially we are checking 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We're checking if we are in this column. Okay, so I'm going to go into the squares and pass through I and get its inner HTML. Okay, and I'm actually going to save this as let total 1. Let's do the same for the others, let total 2. I'm going to do this, I'm going to show you this in a bit, what it looks like. I'm going to add +1 there. Let total 3, so add a 2. Let total 4, so add a 3 there. So now if I console log all these out, in fact, I'm just going to save them as a row. So let's put them in an array, total 1, total 2, total 3, total 4. I'm going to console log out this row. So my row at the moment looks like this. Okay, so that is a row, right? 0, 0, 0, 0. The second row is 2, 0, 2, 0. The third row is 0, 0, 0. Fourth row is 0, 0, 0. And you will see that kind of show up each time we refresh. Okay? And how does it work? Because, well, on the first loop, I is 0, so squares 0. I'm passing through essentially squares 0 plus 1 is 1, squares 0 plus 2 is a 2, and squares 0 plus 3 is the 3. And this is indeed square index with 0, 1, 2, and 3. If, for example, this was a 4 and 4 modulus 4 does equal 0, then I would be 4, and we're passing through a 4 into here, which is this square. And we're passing a 4 into here, and 4 plus 1 is a 5. So essentially the square with index 5, and hopefully you get it. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. Please pause here and have a play around with it if you need to have more time to think. Okay, so great, we have our rows. I'm going to change them into numbers, however. And to do this, I'm just going to pass each one through parse int, just like so. So I'm just going to wrap each one like I'm doing right now. So there we go. So now my row is numbers, so we can work with them a lot more easier. So now I'm actually, because I want the total, I'm going to filter out all the zeros from the array. And I could do that easily. So let filtered row equal. And what I'm going to do is get the row and use filter to filter out just by each number. So now the filtered row instead, console log the filtered row, should just have numbers in there and no zeros. And it does. Okay, so this one has 2, 2, and then it's an empty array. However, this doesn't really help us because we essentially want to remap all these numbers. So I need to fill all the empty spaces. So this empty array should be just full of zeros, right? So I'm going to do that. I'm going to squash all the numbers to the left and fill the rest with zeros. So instead of being 2, 2, this would be 2, 2, 0, 0. So it's changed from being the array 0, 0, 2, 2 to 2, 2, 0, 0. And I could do so easily. I'm just going to get the filtered row just like so. And I'm going to get its length. And say, let's define how many numbers are missing. I'm just going to do 4 minus the filtered row length. So for example, if there's 2 zeros missing, 2 will be there. If there's 4 zeros missing, 4 will be assigned to the variable missing. Okay, and now let's get those zeros. So let zeros, and all I'm going to do is get the missing amount. I'm going to turn this into an array, and I'm going to fill it with zeros. Okay, so now this just means my new row, it's going to be the zeros concat the filtered row. Okay, so let's see my new row. I'm just going to get rid of the previous row because we can see it. So great. So at the moment it looks like this, but if we move everything to the right, so to the right of the screen, it will eventually look like this. So all the 2's have moved to the right. So let's actually display that, right? So great, we've proved that works. And now I'm going to go into the square. So just like we kind of did here, getting the inner HTML, we're going to override that HTML. So squares, let's go into the first one, get the inner HTML. I'm going to override it with the new row first number. And let's do the same for the others. So squares inner HTML, this time I'm going to do +1, and we can just pass through a 1. Squares +2, and we could just pass 2 to get the second item in that array. And then we'll do +3. So ta-da! And then let's see if that works. So maybe let's keep that there. So refresh. And amazing. So ta-da! This is our new filtered row. You will see all the 2's are now lining up at the right-hand side. Okay? Great. So now, of course, we don't want this to be called, I'm just going to get rid of that. We don't want this to be called straight away. We want this to be called essentially when we move a key on our keyboard. So for that, let's just remove that from here. And I'm going to write a function. So assign functions to keys. So the function is going to be called control. And if E key equals arrow left, then we're going to have key left, of course. Let's do else if, so there's no funky behavior. If E key equals arrow right, let's just do these two for now, then key right. Okay? And I'm going to add this to an event listener. So document, we're going to listen out to the whole document. And if we essentially press key down, so press down on the keyboard, we're going to call the function control. Okay, so let's define these two functions. Function key left. We're going to do a few things. We're of course going to move left. We haven't written that yet. So that is something that we're going to have to do. We'll then also combine the row, and then we'll actually move left again. I'll show you what this looks like when we are done, and then we'll generate a new number. So I'm going to copy that and comment that out because we haven't done key left. So let's also just tab it out there for now. And function key right, well, I'm just going to replace these. So move right is the function we wrote. We are yet to combine the row, and then we can move right again. Okay, so that is what happens when we press the key right. Okay, so once again, please go ahead and refresh. Here are the two number twos right now, and if we press the right arrow, what do we expect to happen? Well, we expect them to appear on the right side, and they do. And then another number is generated. So this is looking great. Just refresh that one more time. Here's the 2 and here's a 2. And now both 2's are here, and another one has been generated here for me. Great. I think next, let's work on writing the function combine row. So maybe just here, I'm going to write the function combine row, just like so. And we're going to make a loop again. So for let I equals 0. As long as I is smaller than 15 this time, I'll show you why. We're going to increment I by 1. So combine row should go here. And now what I'm going to say is that if the squares I, so if the square we're currently looking in inner HTML equals, or deeply equals, we can do now, the next square, so I plus 1 inner HTML, well then we can combine them, right? So let combined total equal, make sure this is squares because we're looking in that array, and then we'll get the inner HTML of this. Let's pass it through parse int this time so we can make it a number and we can add them together. So parse int, and then we'll get this one too. So if they deeply equal each other, so if they're the same number, we can essentially add them together like so. So now we've got the combined total as a number, and all I'm going to do is get that current square that we are working with and just overwrite the number to be the combined total. Okay, and the next one that we were talking about, so this one right here, is a 0, right? Because we moved the combined total over to this square. Now, I think we can also start keeping the score. So maybe let's put let score equals 0. And then we can override the score here. If something has been combined, we just add that combined score to the total using the plus equals operator. Great. And then I can also get the score display and just display the actual score for the user to see in the browser. We'll also check for win at this point. So check win like that, or check for win to be more precise. Of course, we haven't written that yet, so I'll comment it out. So now when I move to the right, you will see those numbers are adding up. Okay, how does that work? Well, here we go. We get 2, 2, 2. If I move right again, we get 2's here. So now all the 2's are lined up. But oh, this row will have 2 2's here, right? So if we move that over, they'll combine to a 4. And again, if I move right again, these 2 should combine. So there we go, same for this one. And this only works if the 2 numbers are the same, right? So that's stopped combining because we need them to be the same, and that's the only way they'll add up. So great, this is looking so good. I think you've got it now, right? Let's do the same for moving left. So we're just going to use the same logic. Let's move up here. Here is moving right. So let's write it again. This is going to be great for muscle memory. So I think down here, I'll just move all of this. Function move left this time we're going to work on. Now, I just wanted to show you, if we made this 16, this would not work because we can't essentially get 16 plus 1. That doesn't exist on our board. Okay, so if you did try that, you will get lots of errors, right? Because 16 plus 1 doesn't exist. We can't check the next square, hence we have it as 15. Now let's go back to moving left. So again, let's write a for loop for this. So for let I equals 0. As long as I is smaller than 16, we'll increment I by 1. So once again, let's check each row. So if I modulus 4 equals 0, then we know we're at the start of the row. So essentially, we know that we're in here, 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 or here. And now let's use I in order to check the actual row itself. And in fact, we can actually copy all of this. I'm going to copy all of this, okay, because there's only a slight difference in here. So that is the whole move left function. It's exactly the same. However, instead of getting the zeros and then adding the filtered row, what I am going to do instead is get the filtered row first and concat the zeros. So that is really the only difference there, right? Because we need the numbers being arranged a little bit differently. So that is my move left function. And here we can now uncomment out key left, and ta-da, that is it. There's a lot of great repeating of functions in here. These functions are reusable. So now if you hit the left, okay, ta-da, all the numbers are showing up as on the left, accumulating at the left. So I love this. This is looking good. We've done the move left function. How easy was that? So now we can go left, we can go right. We only need to do up and down next. So let's do it. So in fact, maybe let's continue this here. So else if e key deeply equals arrow up, key up, else if e key equals arrow down, key down. Okay, and now let's define those functions. So this time function key up, it's going to be move up. We're then going to combine the column this time. So combine column, and then we're going to move up again, and then we're going to generate a new number. And I can just copy this really for key down, move down, and there we go. So I'm just going to comment that out for now because we haven't made it yet, and it might cause errors for us. So let's work on the move up function first. So let's do that here. So right after the move left function, I'm going to write another function. This is going to be move up. And this time, we're not going to have to use modulus. We're just going to essentially loop over these first four so we can define our columns. So this is a lot easier actually. For let I equal 0, I'm going to get I, and as long as I is smaller than 4, we're going to increment I by 1. Okay, so that's all I've done. And then once again, I'm just going to get all of the content of this and paste it. So that's the move up function. And then instead of looking to the square to the right, we're going to use the width variable, which is the number 4, remember, to look exactly 4 squares down. So for example, the square I, let's say I is 0, we'll look in here. And then 0 plus the const of width is 4, would mean that we are in this square. So we're checking this square and this square. Total 2 is the inner content of this square. And then same for here. This time we're going to get the width, which is a 4, and multiply it by 2, right? Because essentially we want to look in this square. So once again, let's walk through this. Let's say I is 0. 0 plus width, which is 4, multiplied by 2 is 8. So we're looking in this square with the index 8 to get its inner HTML. So we're essentially getting this square. And then you guessed it, for this one, it's I plus width multiplied by 3. So again, this time, let's, however, define this as column, as that is more precise. We are getting a column in which we are storing all the numbers. And this time, our filtered column, well, we're going to get the column and small and filter out the numbers. Missing, we can define as the filtered column length, 4 minus the filtered column length, to figure out how many have missing values, essentially. And then again, these zeros we have defined. And for a new column moving up, well, first off, I'm going to get the filtered column, in fact, and concat these zeros. Okay, which means that now we can just look in the first square and overwrite it with a new value that lives inside the new columns array. And then this one as well, we just add the width to override the value in this square right here. So new column here, width multiplied by 2, and we'll go into the new column array and get that item with the index 2, and width multiplied by 3 to get the last item in the new columns array. So that is moving up. Next, we also need to define a function to combine the column. So this is easy. We're again going to use the width variable to look for the square right below ours, working on the array. So I'm just going to copy the function combine row, paste it in like so. Let's change this to be combine column. Again, we don't need to loop through everything. In fact, we only need to loop through because we're going to be checking this, the square right below us, right? So we actually stop looping here, because this is the square below us. There's nothing below this square. So this is the square with index 11, right? So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So we're going to essentially loop as long as I is smaller than 12, so we stop at 11. And then we say that if the square we're currently working in, if it deeply equals the square directly below it, so we use the const width to check what item is exactly below it, well, then we get the combined total, which again, we're just looking in the square directly below the one we are currently working in. And then we override its value to be 0 once we've combined the total and given it the square we are working with. Okay, and of course, then we give that to the score and we show the new score in the score display. So great, we've defined the function combine column. So now here I can uncomment it out and let's try moving up. So now just try moving up and you will see all the numbers combining. So that is combined. We get a new number generated here, a new number generated here. If I press up again, this should go up here and that should be a 4. This should go up here and nothing will happen. This should go up here and nothing will happen. However, that doubled up. This should double up to be a 4 and everything is working as it should. So this is looking good. We can go nearly all directions, just key down this time. So you know the drill. I'm going to uncomment function down, function key down, and let's work on the move down function because we can just reuse the combine column function. So let's do it here, right? Or in fact, let's just copy the whole move up function and paste it like so. I'm going to change this to be moved down and we're moving down this time. Again, we just really care about these 4 because we want to define our columns. We are checking everything as it is, and like I did with the move left and move right, instead of getting the filtered columns and concatenating the zeros, I'm going to get the zeros and concat the filtered column instead, and that's the only change that I'm going to do. So now I'm just going to get rid of these. We can uncomment key down. And all of our keys should work. So moving up, moving down, moving left, moving right. This is looking so wonderful. I'm so happy with this. Of course, there are a few more things we need to do, such as, checking for a win and checking for a game over. So that is what we're going to do. And then finally, we're going to add colors to this. So let's do it. In fact, after all of these, so right at the bottom, this is where I'm going to check for the number 2048 in the squares. Okay, so I'm going to look in all the squares. So this should be easy. Check for the number 2048 in these squares to win. Function check for win. So just like that. And we're just going to look at every single square. So we're going to use the loop again for let I equals 0. As long as I is smaller than the square's length, we're going to increment I by 1. Okay, and we're going to look through each square individually. And if the square that we are looping over in that array, in a HTML, equals 2048. I didn't go with deeply because I don't really know if it's strings in there or numbers at this point. I'm going to get the result display, and I'm going to use inner HTML to just display the string of you win. So just like that. Okay? So great. Let's make it more exciting. And then I'm also going to do something. I'm going to get the document, and I'm actually going to remove the event listener of key down control so that we can't do any more moving up, down, or whatever. Okay, so that should then be removed. So that is my check for win. Like I said, we're going to check for win every time we combine a column. So that is looking good. And we're also going to check for a lose. We know we lose if there's no more zeros on the board. So let's check if there are no zeros on the board to lose. Function check for game over is what I'm going to call it. And what I'm going to do is just like we did before. So we're going to loop over everything. So let I equal 0 as long as I is smaller than the square's length. Increment I by 1. And if any of the squares, we're going to check each one. So squares I inner HTML. As soon as one equals 0, that we find one that equals 0, we're going to add it to the zeros, which I'm going to store up here. Let zeros start off with being 0, so they're like so. And if by the end of this loop, so when this finishes, if zeros deeply equals 0, then we know there's no zeros on the board, and then we can get the result display and use inner HTML to just show you lose. Okay, and once again, we're going to get the document and use remove event listener to remove the key down and remove the control, so we can't press up, down, left, right anymore. Great. So I think that is looking good. We'll try it out. I just want to do one more thing and add colors to all of these. So I'm actually going to do that with a function, add colors, function, add colors. So here's my function. And again, we're going to use a loop to loop over every single one. Let I equals 0. As long as I is smaller than the square's length. So just like so, we're going to increment I by 1. And this is going to be a bunch of ifs. So if squares, the square we are looping, inner HTML equals 0. Again, I don't want to take types into consideration. I'm going to get the squares, so the square I'm looping over, and I'm going to use style background color to just give it the hex value, so make it a string, hex value of AFA 192. Okay? So great, and I'm just going to call this down here. So now I actually need the colors to kind of keep adding, I guess, so keep refreshing this each time. And for this, I need to set a variable, so let my timer equals, and on the set interval, I actually want to add the color, so call this function every 50 milliseconds. Okay, so this just means that we're going to be checking for if anything equals 0, and as long as it does, it's going to be this color, okay, this kind of dark color that is actually the same as the text color, okay, the 0 is actually still there if you really want to see it. So I've just added this kind of styling. Let's do the same for the others. We'll check for this one first, else if, and in fact we could just copy this whole line. Squares equals 2 this time. Let's have the background color of EEE4DA. Okay, so that's if it's a 2. Let's do the same for 4. We're gonna have to do a lot of these. There's a lot of colors in this game, but so just bear with me. There's 8, there's 16, there's also 32, there's also 64, there's also 128, there's also 256. So I'm just multiplying this each time. 512, 1024, and then finally 2048. Now it took me a long time to find these colors. You're free to use them, or you can just use whatever colors you wish. EDE 0C8 is what I'm going to use. This one should just be a 4DA. There we go. This one will be F2B 179. This one I'm going to be FFC EA 4. Then we're going to have E8 C064. Then we're going to have FFA B6E. Sorry, this is very boring for you, I'm sure. FD9982. And then EAD 79C 76 DAFF BEEAA 5, and then D7 D4 F0. So all these colors I just added. Woo, that was a lot. And I think that's gonna look good. Let's have a look. Okay, so that is looking so much better. I think that's more like the real game, right? So of course, when we, increase the numbers, more colors will show up. So I think also let's clear the interval right when we lose. So I'm going to write a function here called clear that we can call to clear that interval. So clear interval, and then I'm just going to pass through my timer, and I'm just going to call this. Let's call it after a certain amount of time. So set time out, and I'm just going to clear that, or we don't need to make this like so, we could just do clear after 3000 milliseconds. Let's do that, and then let's do the same for after the check for a win. And where should we have our check for game over? Well, I think each time we generate a number, so on the generate function, there we go. Okay, so I think that's looking good. So let's do it. Let's try this out. So I'm just needing to get a win or a lose. I don't really mind which one. So let's see which one comes first. I have a feeling it's going to be a lose. And ta-da, you lose shows up. Okay, so that is working. I'm just going to check that this has stopped running. So console log running is what I'm going to do. And once again, as soon as we lose, that should stop running. So it's running, and then as soon as we lose, so I'm doing this obviously really badly, that has stopped running. That is looking good. Great, so we stop adding the colors eventually. Okay, so wonderful. And then checking for a win. I think you guys check for a win, because I'm not going to play until I get the high score. I have faith in my code, if that helps. So yeah, once again, this is cleared, so this will stop running. The adding cards will stop running after 3 seconds. So as soon as we hit a game over, we'll wait 3 seconds and it clears that timer. And same for the check win. Great. Just don't forget to uncomment that there as well.